Hey everybody, Greg Lake here again, CEO of Entheo Connect, entheogen-church attorney consultant. Coming today to talk about the Church of the Eagle and Condor. So this is another ayahuasca church based in Arizona, which recently filed a lawsuit against the DEA, CBP, and some other governmental agencies and authorities here last month. So I took a good, and I'm very familiar with the Church of Eagle and Condor. So, through this discussion, I'll provide a lot of background and everything. But I pulled the complaint off of Pacer last week, and then over the weekend read through it really well. And so we're going to talk about it today. This is an exciting case. And let me first kind of revert back to my last video talking about the Arizona Yahe Assembly. I mentioned that the DEA had informal court documents reached out to the Arizona Yahe asking to possibly settle. And again, it's not that they're for sure going to try to settle, but they're going to enter in talks to see if that's even feasible. So not going to go too far into that, but just to say that now there are two pending ayahuasca-church RFRA cases in the district court in Arizona. And then I'll say this, I do believe that the Church of the Eagle and the Condor filed suit perhaps even a few days before the DEA reached out or filed the pleading in the Arizona Yahe case talking about settlement. So, and again, I can't say that for sure, but I'm just thinking back about the dates on the complaint versus when the date was on the filing in the Arizona Yahe case. I want to say that this case was filed previous to their offer to settlement. So that begs the question. Did the the Church of the Eagle and Condor suit perhaps have a role to play in the DEA and the federal government reaching out and trying to come up with a settlement framework with Arizona Yahe? I don't know. But I will say this. The Church of the Eagle and the Condor has very good facts. And we'll talk about that here. They have very good facts. As many know, the Church of the Eagle and the Condor has been closely affiliated with Chacruna, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the protection of sacred plants, indigenous practices, etc. If you haven't yet, I do suggest going to their website, signing up for their Patreon. They put on a lot of good programs, and they have a lot of good people working for their organization that are, headed, I feel, for the most part, in the right direction. And so, Church of the Eagle and Condor has been very, very close with Chacruna. Their leader, Joe Tafour, and some of their board members regularly sit on panels and do talks and have contributed a lot to this space over the last few years. So I just want to, say thank you to them for that. And specifically about Joe Tafour, one reason why I have mad respect for him is because I heard him one time on one of the forums that Chacruna put on. He basically, because obviously Mr. Tafour is a doctor, right, and licensed in the state of Arizona, and the question kind of came up, or a point was made, that Dr. Tafour, being affiliated with this ayahuasca church and into these other alternative healing modalities might put your medical license in jeopardy or question. And he fully accepted that, right? So he fully accepted that he might lose his medical license or have it suspended or something might happen. But he's obviously placed this church in his religious and spiritual practice ahead of that. And for that, I truly commend him. As I tell a lot of people I work with that this is a gray area of law. It is not without risk to run or operate one of these ayahuasca churches, right? So a lot of soul searching needs to be done prior to commencing into these endeavors. And you got to come to the point, because anyone who's going to engage in running an ayahuasca church, facilitating, again, it's not without risk. So if anyone is thinking about doing it, do some very deep reflection, perhaps work with the medicine, and make sure that you're willing to give up that certain level of attachment to some of these material things that we have, because there's a chance you might lose them through the course of this. Now, I'm hoping, through the course of all these lawsuits being filed in this litigation, that that modicum of risk decreases exponentially. But right now, there's just a lot of unknowns as far as the law in this area. So it takes a lot of people saying, look, it's great. I have a law license, legal license, nursing license, or what. And it's not just licenses, but that's one of the main ones that I encounter, and say, Is it more important to me to work with these medicines and help people in this regard? Or is it more important to me to do, this licensure thing? That, granted, most people work very hard for. So it's not an easy decision. It requires a lot of soul searching. And I encourage it, let's not just willy-nilly jump into these things. But, from my impression of what Joe Topher said and my knowledge about his past is that he's done a lot of soul searching, a lot of thinking about this, and came to the conclusion that this church is more important to him. And so for that, I truly commend Dr. Topher. And ultimately, that kind of is a very good fact in this case. So I'm about to jump into it. So yeah, Church of the Eagle and the Condor. And some of these facts I've gleaned from the pleadings. Some of these facts I've gleaned from, just my knowledge in this space. And so if I butcher any of these, I do apologize. Dr. Topher, any lawyers, feel free to correct me. So I'm going to jump right into it. So yeah, so the Church of the Eagle and the Condor. So my impression is that Joe Topher has been working for quite some time with the Shipibo people in Peru, with the Shipibo tribe, which is a very well-known ancient indigenous ayahuasca practice. And so I believe for some period of time, he might have even had a retreat center in Peru that he operated, where obviously people would come from outside the country in to commune with the Shipibo people. Again, I believe Joe Topher is very well versed in their practices and beliefs. And so he was obviously also qualified to serve the medicine according to the Shipibo lineage. But I guess in around 2018, I'm gleaning this fact from the pleadings. Sometime in 2018, he decided to actually establish ayahuasca-church in Arizona in the United States. And to that end, form the Church of the Eagle and the Condor. Now, some might be aware, but this Eagle and Condor reference, okay, is the reference to an ancient, both South American and North American indigenous Indian prophecy that there would come a time where basically, and I might butcher this, so I do apologize, but my understanding is that there would come a time when particularly the people of North America were harming the earth very much, but they have a lot of scientific, industrial knowledge, things of that nature. And then people of the South Americas who are very spiritually in tune, have a lot of spiritual knowledge and practices, particularly with the medicine, would come together. Basically, we would share, North Americans would share their knowledge of technology and industry. And then the South American lineages would share their knowledge of spirit and plants and all that. And these two would come together in order to make a better earth, where we respect Mother Earth, the way that we should, I feel, and just generally get more in touch with spirit, and then also share our knowledge in North America with them, so that way they can, modernize a little bit to make their life even better, right? So it's kind of this mixing of knowledges and technologies. And so the Church of Eagle and Condor believe that part of that prophecy is that, traditional lineages in South America, like the Shipibo and others, coming to America and sharing their knowledge of spirit and sharing their knowledge of this sacred medicine in order to help people of North America come and be more spiritually in tune. And then, that hopefully spills out into the way that we treat others, that we treat the earth. And so that's kind of what this church was built around, its foundational belief system, right? And with all the others that, ayahuasca is the main sacrament. It's sacred. It's a plant spirit, a grandmother spirit. Things of that nature. So, very, I don't want to say typical, but, very deeply held religious views and beliefs and practices as it relates to the sacramental consumption of ayahuasca. Through my research on the definition of religion under the First Amendment, I don't believe at all that they're going to have a problem with the judge finding that they are indeed engaged in both a sincere and a religious activity as far as their sacramental consumption of ayahuasca. As I've said before in the Santo Daime and in the UDV decisions, those were two Christian syncretic religions. So here the Church of the Eagle and Condor does not claim Christian syncreticism, okay? Meaning that no part of their practice or views is really borrowed from Christianity. So that's kind of a distinguishing fact. Now, in the UDV and Santo Daime cases, the government did not controvert whether those two were a religion. So did that have to do with the Christian syncretic part of it? We don't know. We don't have any idea of what the government was thinking when they chose not to controvert that in those two cases. So the big question then is, well, are they going to try to controvert that fact here? Really too early to tell. I mean, obviously, from my point of view, that's a losing argument. I think that there is tons of scholarly support for the notion that indeed these are religious practices. I do know that the Church of Eagle and the Condor are prepared to hire and retain the proper experts to come and testify at trial to establish that fact. Backtrack a little bit. So I was talking about the connection between Church of Eagle and Condor and Chacruna. So Chacruna, a little bit over a year ago, did a fundraiser to raise legal fees and expenses for this litigation. I think their goal was $100,000. Whether they raised that total amount, I cannot say. But I do believe that they've obviously got enough that they feel comfortable to go ahead and pull the trigger, which they did last month. And so, again, there's a very intimate connection between Chacruna and Church of Eagle and the Condor. And I'll say that, to backtrack again, I said that there's really good facts here. That's probably has a large part to do with Chacruna and their lawyers and the Council for Protection of Sacred Plant Medicines being intimately involved in Mr. Tough War's church. So they've helped over the years really build this a solid foundation, which came out into the pleadings and I think will eventually come out into the record. And I believe it's going to be very hard for the government to win this case. I don't think they have a very good chance at all. Kind of like with the Arizona Yahe, once they get to the facts, it's better to talk settlement, than to go all the way through, because as these courts rule in favor of these ayahuasca churches, the law gets more certain, right? And when the law gets more certain, that empowers more people to exercise their religious freedom. And the government doesn't want that. DEA don't want people exercising their religious freedom as it relates to, Schedule I substances. And I say that, I'm not going to state everyone in the DEA, but as we've seen over the last several years, the DEA has not been very kind to working with these types of practitioners, right? So hopefully that'll change. I do hope to see the day where sincere religious practitioners who are safe and handle their sacrament properly can work with the DEA. That way we can avoid all this litigation, because ultimately that saves the taxpayer money and ultimately is more favorable for religious freedom. So hopefully we'll see that day. But again, that day's not going to come, I don't feel, until there's enough litigation and enough kind of, I hate to say it, beating up on the government. Not that I have disdain for the government. I do realize the DEA, they're just doing their job. And a lot of these DEA agents aren't real privy to the sacredness of these practices, of the long traditions and history behind these practices, right? But I feel as we educate them and educate the general public, hopefully that attitude will shift over time. So let me jump in now to some of the claims being made by Church of Eagle and the Condor. I took some notes on this pad, so you might see me looking down to reference it. But let's do just a little bit more backtracking. So again, 2018, Dr. Tafur and the other board members, who are all very distinguished people in this space, formed the church. Apparently, and I want to say in the complaint, it says somewhere around September 2020, they had sacraments shipped from Peru up to the United States for the church. Well, it was seized by CBP. After they seized it, they merely sent one letter to Dr. Tafur saying, hey, we took your sacrament. Now, ordinarily, before they can just ultimately seize indefinitely and or destroy something that they've seized coming across customs, you're entitled to a hearing and notice in a hearing, right? That's procedural due process. Well, according to the complaint, they never received that, which is consistent with a lot of other seizures that I've been made aware of, that some people don't even get an initial letter. They just keep it. And I'm going to get in that into another video, because I have a client who had sacrament seized with not even a letter, and it's been going on 100 days. So, but we'll save that for another video. But just to say that these unconstitutional seizure processes that are going on, it's not just the Eagle and the Condor. This seems to be systemic as far as CBP in regards to ayahuasca. So again, I hope we see some resolution to these issues because it's kind of gotten out of hand. But anyway, so they had sacrament seized by CBP, no procedural due process. Apparently, and so here we'll go here. Okay. So sometime about a year ago, Chacruna, the lawyers at Chacruna, on behalf of the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, sent Freedom of Information Act requests to both CBP and the DEA. These requests were not only, I believe, targeted at the specific seizure of the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, but also aimed at gleaning information about total seizures, right? And there was an article written by Sean McAllister, one of the lead attorneys on this case, talking about the information that they gleaned from these FOIA responses that they got. Now, one thing they did figure out is that the CBP destroyed the ayahuasca, which, according to the Church of the Eagle and the Condor and many, many other religious practitioners in this area, is sacrilegious, right? Because ayahuasca itself is a spirit and sacred, right? So like when you destroy it, you're destroying, the spirit and something that's sacred. And so that's sacrilegious and offensive to the Eagle and the Condor, and I'm sure many, many other ayahuasca practitioners in this country and all over the world. So apparently when CBP, and so the DEA, I don't believe ever provided any responses, despite repeated requests to do so from the FOIA request. But the CBP did on, again, not only the specific seizure, but on total seizures. The document, according to the complaint, was highly redacted and not compliant with Freedom of Information Act. So the Church of the Eagle and Condor has brought a lawsuit with many claims, but just to note that two of the claims are FOIA violations against both CBP for producing a highly redacted, non-responsive document, and as well as the DEA for, I believe, just being completely non-responsive. So that's part of the claims. Okay. So, and then obviously there's asserting a Religious Freedom and Restoration Act claim, right? They're saying that, obviously that they're sincere religious practitioners, which I just said, I think that they're going to have no problem on those facts, even if they have to get expert testimony in that regard. But the substantial burden. So according to Church of the Eagle and Condor, substantial burden lies both in the seized sacrament and the ongoing threat of prosecution. And they even reference the Arizona, not specifically, but they reference and I touched on this briefly in the last video, the Arizona Ahe. The fact that they had more or less the federal government, it's believed, to have pressed the local government in Arizona to kick in Clay Villanueva's door and prosecute him, right? So they're using that too as like, look, Judge, they're getting local law enforcement to kick in doors, prosecute people. This constitutes a substantial burden on our practice because it's a constant threat of prosecution to us, right? So those are two avenues there that they're claiming substantial burden. Now, other parts of the RFRA claim, obviously when we talk about the compelling governmental interest is going to be safety and diversion. Now, in the complaint, they don't go real far into this safety thing other than to say, we have a code of conduct, we have ethics, we have these other ceremony screening procedures, and then also protocols and procedures as it relates to safety at the actual ceremony, right? Which is more or less all that's required if we look at the UDV and Santo Daime opinions, right? So they just generally mention those items. Again, it wouldn't be real proper in a complaint to go into extreme detail there. As a litigation attorney, I've always been the mindset to try to keep a complaint kind of as short and sweet as possible. And then on diversion, and this is something that I've always recommended, helping people in this space is that, on diversion, there's kind of three key things that you need to have, I believe, to really have a solid case. And all of three are mentioned here. And one is that, and again, this was mentioned in the UDV and Santo Daime opinions, that only very few higher church officials even are able to access the sacrament. Two, that it's kept reasonably secure. I always talk about the 3-lock DEA rule, which is kind of like the gold standard that the DEA has as it relates to medical and research institutions, which, by the way, would not necessarily be directly applicable here, but it's just a standard. Now, Whether the Church of the Eagle and the Condor has the 3-lock system in place, I don't know. I would guess that they probably do. But I can guarantee you that they keep it reasonably secure. I don't see them having a diversion issue. And then the third thing, that's always good for diversion is keeping a solid log and track of the sacrament. How much comes in? How much do we have total? How much goes out to this ceremony, right? You don't have to say, oh, we gave 2 milliliters to Joe or anything like that. But, at least on a ceremony by ceremony basis, keeping track of the existing amount of sacrament, that they then possess. So again, in this complaint, they mention all that, right? So, and this kind of relates back to them working with Chacruna. I have no doubt in my mind that they've come up with very, very solid policies and procedures as it relates to safety and diversion. Again, very good facts here. There's going to be very good facts here, and it's going to be kind of an or uphill battle for the government here. They've got a very solid legal team, the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, several lawyers from Chacruna, several lawyers that participate in the UDV and Santo Daime opinions. So they've got probably the most solid legal team that a church could have, really, pressing this kind of case. So outlook is very good here. Let me go briefly over some of the other claims that they're asserting, just because I want to make sure that everyone knows everything that's being asked. So they're also asserting a First Amendment Establishment Clause claim. So what's this First Amendment Establishment Clause? So obviously the First Amendment prevents the federal government from respecting one establishment of religion over another. And what they're saying here is that, look, the DEA has been working with the Santo Daime and the UDV for years. We are similarly situated, right? So basically, if they don't agree to work with us, that's respecting an establishment of religion, these Christian syncretic religions, over, the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, which, for lack of, descriptor, is a purely shamanic tradition. So they're respecting these Christian syncretic ones, but not respecting us, thereby creating an establishment of religion. So that's another claim. Very clever claim there, and I like it. That's a very good claim. And then generally the First Amendment free exercise, right? That basically the government's policies and procedures as it relates to not letting sacrament in, and by prosecuting people, they're hampering the First Amendment free exercise rights of, the Church of the Eagle and the Condor. Good claim, but obviously RFRA kind of overshadows that claim, and I won't go into the details there, but just know that the RFRA claim kind of overshadows it. But like every good litigator, you throw everything against the wall, right? You throw, we call it a shotgun approach, shoot everything. But, it's not like shoot everything and hope it sticks. These are very valid claims that are being asserted. So I don't want to say that they're just trying to reach for something that's going to work. 9/10 of the claims here are going to work. So in my opinion, obviously, as I've already mentioned, a procedural due process claim for the CBP not giving them hearing and notice before they decided to permanently seize and destroy the sacrament. A substantive due process claim right along with the procedural for the same conduct. Another one I like, Fifth Amendment equal protection claim, because again, the court has allowed the UDV and Santo Daime to practice their religion. Again, Church of the Eagle and the Condor, similarly situated. So if they're not allowed to practice, well, that creates an equal protection issue, Fifth Amendment. Let's see. And I'm not too real clear on this. I think it's kind of a catch-all claim. It's a Ninth Amendment rights not enumerated claim. I couldn't glean too much for the complaint here. I trust in the legal opinion and decision here with the lawyers. I will try to speak with them in the interim and get a little bit more detail on exactly what that entails. But they asserted a Ninth Amendment claim. And then the last two are the CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, and DEA FOIA violations. Those are the other two claims that are being asserted. Lastly, let's talk about the relief requested. Now, they've kind of gone, well, for one, they're asking for a temporary and permanent injunction, which is consistent with both the UDV and Santo Daime opinions. But what's kind of different here and has been talked about amongst lawyers in the space for the last couple of years is, well, what about a declaratory action? So in a declaratory action, you basically just present the judge with either a real or potential controversy, and the judge will declare from the court's view, what the rights are of the respective parties, right? So they're wanting judge to declare that, they're sincere religious practitioners, that they have the right to import and sacramentally consume ayahuasca, and that the conduct of the federal government is in violation of their rights. And so, yeah, this declaratory action is new in these types of cases. And, I like it. I mean, I think it's good. The declaratory actions, sometimes they're hard to get because you have to present a real, or perceived, something concrete dispute or possible injury. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out here. If that goes and then the judge follows through with making a declaratory action in favor of the Church of Eagle and Condor, that's very good for a number of different reasons. So we're going to keep our eye on that, and we're going to see how that goes. One other thing I'd like to mention that we learned through the Arizona Yahe litigation is that in the Ninth Circuit, they've got a pretty strict standard and just so you know, I'm shifting here to the injunction. In order to get an injunction, you have to show like a real immediate harm to occur in order for the court to kind of jump out ahead and declare, to rule for an injunction. In the Arizona Yahe case, the judge ruled after they dismissed their fourth amended complaint that basically, unless the Arizona Yahe allege that they have violated the Controlled Substances Act, are currently violating the Controlled Substances Act, and intend to continue to violate the Controlled Substances Act, that there might not be a real or imminent enough threat of injury for a either temporary or permanent injunction to go into place. So obviously the legal team here is very up to par with all the ongoing litigation, because they did in fact plead that here, that the Church of the Eagle and the Condor has been violating the Controlled Substances Act, surely is currently violating it, and intends well into the future to violate it. So with that fact pleaded alone, I think that they're going to have no trouble with moving judge to basically rule on their temporary and permanent injunction. So I think they're good to go. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how this litigation proceeds. I think it has a good shot, possibly much sooner than the Arizona Yahe, of leading to some type of settlement negotiations. And shout out to Rob Hefferman here. After my last video, we kind of had a discussion in the Facebook feed about what could the DEA or the federal government promise to the Arizona Yahe, or what would I as a lawyer make them agree to in order to even take seriously their offer of settlement. Because as we saw in the SoulQuest case, the offer of settlement basically led to them entering into the record that denial letter, which the judge latched onto and said, oh, well, some of this is a final decision under 893, so I don't have jurisdiction. And now SoulQuest is in front of the 11th Circuit Court. So, what can we do to avoid that type of situation? And not to mention, they took forever. It took like a whole other year, that they stayed the case to even come to that point, which didn't turn out good for SoulQuest. They basically wasted a whole year in litigation to render a decision that made SoulQuest hard. It made it harder for them. When I say harder, just more protracted to get what they're ultimately seeking, an exemption, which they're now going to have to go argue in front of the 11th Circuit. So what would it look like as a lawyer in the space to be an acceptable means to try and negotiate with the federal government in this case? Well, twofold. One, we would need to set some very reasonable timelines, because really what the settlement offer here is the DEA is saying, look, let us conduct an investigation on the facts, and maybe we can work with you if we find that those facts are suitable for us to feel comfortable to work with you to import, and store sacrament. So one, reasonable timelines. In no event would I ever agree to a timeline that took over, let's say, 9 months to a year. Two, and this is the most important, to avoid the SoulQuest facts where they entered in a denial letter and then it got kicked to the 11th Circuit, I would demand that we enter into a stipulation into the record, okay, that any decision made by the DEA as a consequence of its investigation and possible settlement negotiations does not constitute a final agency decision under 893, which is the Controlled Substances Act. Because normally, let's say you have a medical research facility that applies for a DEA license. Well, the DEA does its investigation and it formally denies them. Well, under the Controlled Substances Act, the district court no longer has jurisdiction. You have to go straight to the circuit court to get that hammered out. And that's what happened to SoulQuest. Basically, the judge said, well, because they ruled, granted, you're right, they don't have really jurisdiction to determine sincerity or religiousness, but they do have jurisdiction over this diversion issue. So the fact that they entered a final decision on diversion means that I no longer have jurisdiction. And again, lots of legal commentators think this was wrong by the district court there, and it probably just because they didn't want to decide on it. But anyways, that's what they decided. So now they have to go to the 11th Circuit to do that. So I would make sure that here the government, in the record stipulated that, look, if we make a decision here, even if we file it into the record, we're not contending that this constitutes a final agency decision under 893. So those would be the two things that would need to be done and hammered out before any real meaningful settlement negotiations could take place. I have no doubt that the Arizona Yahe's attorney is probably thinking along those same lines and is going to be adamant on those, in order to enter into settlement negotiations with the government. So it remains to be seen. Again, in that case, they should be reporting back, I believe, into this month, maybe the 26th or 27th. Hell, I said it on the last video. I can't remember now. But I'm going to check the pleadings. They're supposed to give a status update on whether the Arizona Yahe and the federal government are going to be able to, enter into meaningful, good faith settlement negotiations. So stay tuned. I do appreciate everybody who has been checking out the videos, liking, sharing, commenting. I'm going to keep doing this. I found a lot of peace in this. I like to let everyone in the community know where this litigation stands, where your rights are as far as in how they're affected by these decisions. So yeah, the more likes, shares, subscribers we get, the more motivated I get to do it. But to be honest, I'm going to do it anyways. Sometimes I just like to hear myself talk. But and one more thing, it does help me to get on here and speak these things. It kind of furthers further develops my knowledge and understanding and dynamics of the issues. So thank you, everybody. On Entheo Connect, we've had to push the launch back like 4 days. Look, I take the blame. I've been insistent on integrating sacred geometry throughout the platform. So to kind of get the design down and the color scheme and stuff took us a few days, but we're set for July 29th. We will be launching our listing platform. So again, if you run an entheogenic church or if you have some type of service, that's commensurate with those types of practices, feel free to pre-register, shoot us your name and email, and we'll have special deals going out to everybody who's on the email list. And anybody just wants to connect, reach out to me, george.lake@entheoconnect.com. I'm taking Zoom meetings with everybody. So just shoot me a message. Let's talk, see how we can collaborate, see how we can bring more light to these practices and this burgeoning movement. Much love, everybody. Hope everybody has a blessed week and an even happier weekend. I will try to report back next week with another video. Much love.